Welcome to the Four Witnesses of the Messiah, Chapter 4, Session 4B, Jesus Christ the Apostle. We are still in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, Part 3. We're still extolling the beauties of the Beatitudes, like travelers searching the world for lovely vistas, lookout points from which we may behold grandeur. We found this place, the perfect spot from which, enthralled, we gaze upon magnificence. We don't want to leave this location. We want to build our home here. This is the perspective with which Jesus opened the Sermon on the Mount. Can you see why I say that these are the most profound words ever spoken? They open, not close. They invite, not discourage. They pull, not push. They heal, not harm. They are timeless. There's not a time in our lives when we don't need to have these virtues. We may be beginners who have just found this new possibility, a refreshing alternative to the problems that have been plaguing us. Jesus is beckoning. Come this way. This is the way to life. Begin here. Or we may be at an intermediate level in our faith, having experienced some deliverance and having tasted and seen that God is good. And we want more. Well, there's much more available. Or we are advanced, being delivered and so convinced that we are determined to share it with others. Well, there's a plenty of that too. There's not a time in our lives when we don't need to have these. Virtues are inherently good, mature, and desirable. When one has achieved proficiency in a virtue, one feels noble, fulfilled, self-actualized. Those who have virtue indeed are at the forefront of the human race. Do you have virtues? Do you want more? I took Jesus' cue and looked up lists of all the virtues possible. About 75 of them. And then I separated them out into categories with each of Jesus' cardinal virtues at the head. And they do fit that way. Each cardinal virtue does give birth to the rest of the virtues in its category. And I list that all in my book because they are timeless. There is not a dispensation in which they are unnecessary. This is a list of 9 virtues. There are other lists in the Bible. There's even another list of 9 virtues in the grace administration, the fruit of the Spirit. It is a list of virtues in contrast to a bunch of vices, and Galatians chapter 5 discusses walking by the Spirit versus the works of the flesh. So when we walk by the Spirit, we're going to manifest the Spirit and get the fruit of the Spirit. The words Spirit and flesh are repeated throughout Galatians 5. And then it gives us this list of 9 virtues. Galatians chapter 5, verse 22. Galatians 5:22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. Do these line up with Jesus' list? Amazingly, they do. Most of the virtues match and need no explanation. And any difficult ones can be matched by a process of elimination. So, humility matches with gentleness. Mourning or equanimity matches with long-suffering. Meekness is meekness. Hunger and thirst for righteousness matches with joy. Mercy and compassion matches with love. Pure in heart matches with temperance. Peacemaking matches with peace. Courage to endure persecution matches with goodness. And faith with faith. Further explanation. Gentleness is the Greek word chresotes, which Thayer defines as integrity. This virtue is related to humility, for we achieve integrity and trustworthiness by continued obedience. Mourning involves coping with evil properly, with equanimity. That's being unflappable, staying on course, staying uncontaminated. That fits with long-suffering. Joy, in the inspiration cardinal virtue category, is headed by hunger and thirst for righteousness. Goodness is the Greek word agosune, which is the quality of him who is ruled and aims at good moral worth. This moral worth is the core of the courage which is willing to suffer persecution for righteousness' sake and never yield. So, here we see another way to bring out these virtues of our true spiritual nature in our life, which is to manifest the Spirit, to walk by the Spirit. Learning the mastery of this is our path in the intermediate level of our growth. The more we do that, the more these virtuous fruit result, and we will have mastered in our lives, and the less and less we will succumb to the vices which are also listed here in Galatians. There is another list in the grace administration in Ephesians 4. It's remarkable that the same categories of virtues for believers are echoed here in Ephesians 4. Therefore, these virtues indeed are timeless for all eras, for all levels of spiritual growth. But this list is for advanced believers to fulfill their callings. Ephesians 4, verse 1. Ephesians 4, verse 1. I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you that you walk worthy, balanced, of the vocation wherewith you are called, with all lowliness and meekness, with longsuffering, forbearing one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So, lowliness lines up with humility. Long-suffering in Ephesians 4 lines up with long-suffering in the fruit of the Spirit and equanimity in the Beatitudes. Meekness is across the board in all three. Diligence in Ephesians 4, spude, is in the hunger and thirst inspiration category. Love matches with love in the fruit of the Spirit that matches with mercy in the Beatitudes. Walking worthy of your calling, being balanced, is matching with temperance and being pure in heart. Peace is across the board in all three. Forbearance matches with courage to endure persecution. And then the faith category is unity of the Spirit, keeping the family of faith. So again, these line up. There's even exact correspondence with either Jesus' list or with the fruit of the Spirit list. So walking worthy is to walk in a balanced, mature fashion. That's pure in heart. Lowliness literally is the same as humility. That further supports the concept that the first beatitude involves not being poor, but being poor in spirit, being humble. Meekness is the same all the way across. Long-suffering is in the equanimity, mourning category. Forbearance and the courage for enduring persecution for the sake of righteousness. Love is in the mercy category. Endeavoring is the Greek word spoudazo, meets diligence. Diligence is in the hunger and thirst for righteousness category. Peace is all the way across. Remaining virtue is to match faith, and that's implied by the unity of the Spirit in the one body, the family of faith. So it's amazing. these virtues are here too. God's Word fits together perfectly. This cardinal virtue list is confirmed. In Ephesians, the list is at the advanced level, to those who know what their callings are. Paul wrote this advanced list to the believers in the Gentile Christian church. Peter wrote a similar list to the Jewish Christian church in 2 Peter chapter 1. He declared, "If you do these things, you shall never fall." What things? The same 9. Wow. Because they're Jesus' timeless cardinal virtues for all believers at all times, in all cultures. And so the only thing I can say is, wow, 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 9 times. Wow, that's deep, folks. Are you beginning to see why I say the Beatitudes are the most profound words ever spoken? The virtues are timeless. They weren't something simply for Jesus' time during the gospel era. They're a foundation for every man, always, for all faith. Faith 101. They're a shining light for all believers at all times, in all cultures, in all circumstances. It's in every man's treasure. Anyone can achieve them. This is yet another wonderful sparkle, an additional perspective from the crown jewel of the Beatitudes that's opened up for us by the Rosetta Stone in the passage. Remember that phrase repetition? Because if these Beatitudes blaze the pathway all the way to the kingdom of heaven, then they're the bedrock of that path too. It's more proof that Jesus certainly is the Son of Man and that he loves and understands us humans. That is because these are so fundamental and timeless that they are applicable no matter what brand name believers are and no matter what level of maturity we are. Anyone who believes in God should endeavor to bring out these inherently spiritual virtues in themselves. Then everything else good, pure, and godly will flow from them. They are a highway to healing. They are a passageway out of problems. They are the road to genuineness. When Jesus opened his manifesto of faith with these, he was declaring that he was not concerned with outward shallow rites and demonstrations of piety and religious trappings, which could be imposed by legalism. The Pharisees had abused the faith so much that telling everyone what to do all the time, that approach was being rendered ineffective. Consequently, Jesus championed these attractive inner mental attitudes, which, when they are adopted, will produce genuine outward fruit. This proves that proper attitudes and practices are more important to God than ritual, tradition, or dogma, because God wants our hearts. Have you been to the mountaintop? Have you comprehended the vista before you? Do you understand? Take all the pictures you want. Treasure the memory of what we have seen. This is what Jesus wanted us to see. It took him years to learn it and to think about how to best present it. And then he laid it all out in 90 seconds. But it'll take us a lifetime to live it. Yea, 2 lifetimes. One for now, and one in the time to come. Let us take one more look at the panorama to take it all in, so that we'll never forget it. Because they are the cardinal virtues. They encompass all virtue because they lead to the kingdom of heaven. They are paths to healing. They get God involved in our very hearts. And that's where he does his greatest work. Humility. Jesus chose to lead his list with humility To be poor in spirit, ego, pride is to be rich in humility. So many good things spring from a humble attitude. To humble oneself before God begets reverence, worship, and obedience. And from these, we reap God's providence, peace, security, and much more. Pride was the first sin when Lucifer was lifted up with it and tried to be like God. Then he used the same trick on Adam and Eve. So it's quite fitting that the first cardinal virtue of Jesus is the opposite, humility. The Greek word for humility in the Bible is tapendos, which means a low condition, lowly in spirit, humble. In the classical Greek period, this was viewed as a negative. But when the Old Testament was translated into the Greek Septuagint, this concept was elevated into a positive by virtue of its use in the translation. The trait which the Bible emphasizes in humility is obedience. When we humble ourselves before God, we obey Him. When Moses confronted Pharaoh, humility was characterized by obedience. Look at Exodus 10, verse 3. Exodus chapter 10, verse 3. And Moses and Aaron came in unto Pharaoh and said to him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, How long wilt thou refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. In other words, obey me. Same's true with God's response when Solomon dedicated the temple. Look at 2 Chronicles 7. 2 Chronicles 7, verse 14. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. See, pray, seek His face, turn from their wicked ways, all flow from humility. See, the other virtues which are related to humility are obedience, reverence, piety, modesty, chastity, honesty, cleanliness, tidiness, morality, loyalty, trustworthiness, integrity, and fidelity. Those are all wonderful virtues, but they are all based in a respect for and obedience to God by acknowledging our low estate when compared to Him. This lowness is not emphasizing our unworthiness because we are by nature depraved and sinful. No, for Jesus was coming to solve that issue. It's more an acknowledgement of God's regality and divinity, omnipotence and omniscience. All kinds of wonderful things will open up in our lives if we let God in. Being humble to Him is the start. Next one, mourning. The second virtue on Jesus' list is very thought-provoking. What do we do when calamity strikes? Do we explode and become angry, or judgmental, or vindictive? Or do we implode into a ball of grief forever? Or should we go to God for help and to mourn? You know, we live in an evil world that we're not in control of despite our best efforts. We spend much of our lives trying to carve out a secure life, and it can be destroyed in seconds. When calamity occurs to believers, there's two general reactions in relation to God. We can either blame God or run to Him for help. The correct response in times of calamity is to go to God, to mourn, and to pray, and to believe for aid. Other reactions will just prolong the effects of evil. God knows how to help. The key to understanding this category of virtues is to consider the entire group as a whole. The other virtues which fall into this category are equanimity, hopefulness, optimism, patience, endurance, contentment, trustingness, serenity, and innocence. That's what this is talking about. When calamity strikes, it's virtuous to possess the equanimity, the even-temperedness, to handle the event in a level-headed, healthy, constructive way, and not allow the negatives to further poison us by means of an improper reaction. And sure, part of that is grieving. We don't suppress that. It hurts, and God is there to comfort. Job chapter 1, verse 20 talks about this. Job chapter 1, verse 20. After all that happened to Job, then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, fell down upon the ground, and worshipped, and said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. That's the picture of this. Job handled adversity properly, and God's insurance policy later paid him back double. That's a promise we can hold on to in difficult times. Equanimity keeps evil from becoming an invited guest in our lives because we feel we need to have revenge or react to the evil in the wrong way. That just prolongs it, and it poisons us because plotting revenge or giving up or whatever negative reaction that's not right, that doesn't do us any good. This pathway lights the way back to wholeness when we have suffered loss. Next one, meekness. The next pivotal virtue in Jesus' list is meekness. Humility and meekness are close in meaning, but there's an important difference in connotation. The meanings for the Greek word praotes, translated meekness, include gentleness, mildness, and friendliness. But meekness is not weakness or having been humbled by circumstances. Numbers 12:3 states that Moses was the meekest man upon the earth in his day. But Moses was no pushover. He went fearlessly face to face with Pharaoh, the most powerful man on the earth. If we become meek to God, we will benefit. Look at James chapter 1, verse 21. James chapter 1, verse 21. Wherefore lay apart all filthiness and superfluity, abundance of evil, naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word, implanted, which is able to save your souls. It's able to save your soul. We need to receive it, though. Meekness allows us to receive instruction from God, which is able to make us whole. Football players need to be meek to succeed in their game because they must be coachable, even though they're fierce enough to knock someone to the ground in the field of play. So, meekness is not to be confused with weakness. Richard Trench beautifully explains it in his book, Synonyms of the New Testament. Quote, the scriptural praotes, meekness, is not in a man's outward behavior only, nor yet in his relations to his fellow men, as little in his mere natural disposition. Rather, it is an inwrought grace of the soul, and the exercises of it are first and chiefly toward God. It is that temper of spirit in which we accept his dealings with us as good, and therefore without disputing or resisting, and it is closely linked with tapinosune, humble-mindedness, and follows directly upon it, because it is only the humble heart which is also meek, and which, as such, does not fight against God, and more or less struggle and contend with him. Unquote. To me, the key to understanding meekness is that it emphasizes openness and receptivity To be meek is to be teachable, to be coachable, and not argue with God. Its use in Psalms supports this. Psalm 25, verse 9. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his way. So, meekness lets us be guided and taught. Because of this connection, the other virtues in this category all deal with information transfer. These are wisdom, knowledgeableness, prudence, intelligence, discernment, having understanding, foresight, being logic-minded, and reason-ruled. All of those virtues are attractive things, and the Greeks valued them highly. That's why they made prudence a category head. However, without humility and meekness to God, knowledge and the rest of these are worthless. The shining pathway of meekness leads us to learn things from the heart of God to fill us with joy. Next one, hunger and thirst for righteousness. The next virtue on this list is important. It's hunger and thirst for righteousness. This involves seeking truth, but it's more than that. You see, we can have access to all the natural and spiritual knowledge available, but if we don't want it enough to pursue it, everything still is worthless. We need to be hungry and thirsty for it. This category of virtue involves motivation and inspiration, something the Greeks did not put in a separate category. But motivation indeed is pivotal, because without it, without the right motives, everything's still worthless. The other virtues in this category are ability, attention, awareness, curiosity, creativity, diligence, enthusiasm, intelligence, intuition, industriousness, inquisitiveness, inventiveness, joyfulness, mindfulness, readiness, and purposefulness. When contemplating which one is worthy of leading the category, one can say that intelligence or inquisitiveness or curiosity are laudatory, but they're just human achievement. But hunger and thirst is far deeper, because they imply the need for survival. The things that we are hungry and thirsty for, when we get them, they become incorporated into our entire being. While doing my initial research on the Sermon on the Mount, I shared what I was learning with lots of people. And one time I shared it with a woman who was an elder in her church. I must have said something that struck a chord with her, because after that, she confessed to me that she and some of her church friends had realized that what they were being taught was not meeting their needs. She literally told me they had realized they were not being fed. But she also told me that if anyone ever asked if they were satisfied, that no one would dare say they weren't. Many of the believers Jesus was addressing on that hillside in Galilee were in the same situation. The legalists who were in control were only doing things for their own interest or benefit, and the rest of the people's needs were being neglected. Sometimes when negative things happen and people have tolerated them for so long, they become used to them, and the thought of ever getting anything better fades, and thus they willingly stay entrapped. And this is why Jesus knew hunger and thirst were key concepts for that crowd on the hillside. Well, how hungry are you? How far are you willing to go to actually get what you came to church for? The word filled in the Greek is karatzo, which means to eat to one's fill, to be satisfied. In other words, it's to satiate one's appetite. So, how hungry are you? Everyone can get a different amount depending upon how hungry they are. So, there was both an invitation and a promise. The answers to our situations are out there. If we're hungry enough to find them, we will be motivated to keep asking and keep searching and keep knocking until we get them. If we keep following this shining path, we will find the way out of our situations. Next one, mercifulness. This next virtue is the product of the influence of Hebrew culture. The Greek list was dispassionate and intellectual, but this virtue involves emotion. Acts of mercy arise from compassion. The two Hebrew words for mercy are rachamim and chesed. Rachamim, or mercy, compassion, literally means bowels, which were thought by the Hebrews to be the seat of emotions. The other Hebrew word, chesed, emphasizes the kindness aspect that's within mercy. It's a cruel world out there, and like the bumper sticker says, stuff happens. Well, it doesn't really say that, but you know what I mean. Sometimes people fail and suffer injury because something they did or neglected. Other times they suffer calamity because they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Have you ever heard that phrase, there but for the grace of God go I? That's something to think about. When you see someone's calamity, do you turn your eyes away? The Jews were supposed to reach out and be merciful in those circumstances. That's why the parable of the Good Samaritan was so poignant. A priest and a Levite had an opportunity to help that wounded man in the parable, but they refused. It was the Samaritan who finally did help. And the Samaritans were those despised half-Jews. We just have to develop some common spiritual sense with this. We definitely should say no to the aggressive beggars who try to push or intimidate or guilt us into giving. I mean, any charity which utilizes guilt motivation advertising should be avoided. If they're willing to stoop so low to manipulate like that, well, what else does that say about their ability to make wise choices with the contributions? We definitely should check out charities and see what percentage is actually getting to those they claim to help. But we shouldn't selfishly close off this avenue by which God can bless us, because who does being merciful help the most? Us. Because God gives back. And when He gives back what we need. The other virtues in this category are altruism, benevolence, caringness, charity, empathy, friendliness, generosity, gentleness, helpfulness, hospitality, kindness, lovingness, nurturing, sensitivity, sharing, and tolerance. But the proper head of the category is the Hebrew concept of mercy or compassion, because that often is the way that God gets our attention. By triggering it in our heart, our compassion can be the beginning of great deliverance. You see, it's a path that leads out. What makes this poignant when dealing with the religious repression of that or any other era is we can never allow ourselves to become so hurt or so introspective or so angry that we refuse to be merciful or loving or charitable, because giving opens many doors for God to bless us back. And when we're hurt, we especially need Him acting in our lives in any and every way we can get Him involved. Giving involves the spiritual law, which will ultimately bring things back to us if we apply it. So, if you become hurt, never stop giving. Never allow anything to stop you from doing what God has called you to do, because it's your shining path to deliverance. Next one, pure of heart. This next category is actually another central theme to the Sermon on the Mount, to be genuine. The Greeks thought temperance to be the most desirable in this category. However, to be pure in heart is more God-centered and moral than mere generic self-control, therefore more worthy of leading the category. We can understand this concept better when we consider the other related virtues, which are genuineness, moral integrity, temperance, balance, orderliness, conscientiousness, caution, frugality, restraint, self-discipline, moderation, honesty, sincerity, truthfulness, candor, thankfulness. The book of Proverbs often extols this kind of virtue. Also, Psalms talks of it. Look at Psalms 24. Psalm 24, verse 3. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Or who shall stand in his holy place? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul unto vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. He shall receive the blessing from the Lord, and righteousness from the God of his salvation. This is the generation of them that seek him, that seek thy face, O Jacob, Selah. A pure heart is built by maintaining pure thoughts, to not involve our lives in vanity. Vanity is thinking and behavior which is not according to the Word of God. And note, there's a similar association between the Beatitude reward, they shall see God, and verse 6 of Psalm 24, them that seek him, that seek thy face. The promise coupled to this virtue is, we will ultimately see God. But this shining pathway involves getting glimpses of him now. Those epiphanies will change our lives. Peacemaking. The Greeks esteemed justice to be chief in this category, but justice without God is shallow. Jesus, on the other hand, put peacemaking at the head of this category, because peace is the real goal of true justice. Other related virtues are courteousness, consideration, cooperativeness, citizenship, encouragement, fairness, flexibility, friendliness, forgiveness, impartiality, respectfulness, openness, tactfulness, and thoughtfulness. This virtue entails caring enough to get involved with people to try to heal them from conflict so that justice can be wrought and peace enjoyed. That's an admirable trait. But many don't have the patience and love to shoulder that burden, to wade into the midst of a conflict between people and listen them out and perceive the keys which lead to resolution, and then mediate the issues to a successful resolution. Those are peacemakers that do that. Another facet of this virtue is to help believers make peace with God. Some of you have been called to be peacemakers. So get busy. And then Romans will be descriptive of you. Romans chapter 10, verse 14. Romans chapter 10, verse 14. How then shall they call on him who they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that preach the gospel of peace and bring glad tidings of good things. Verse 15 contains that picturesque idiom, how beautiful are our feet. Well, it's not referring to whether we painted our toenails. Wherever our feet are, there we are. That's beauty. And if we're preaching the gospel of peace, wow, it's the gospel of peace. Making peace with God via the work of his Son. Getting involved like this also has a side benefit, because while God is working in us to help solve others' problems, he'll also deal with us and heal us, because he's already working in us, right? So that benefit is amplified. Finally, enduring persecution for righteousness' sake. Eighth beatitude virtue involves standing up for being right, even though it may bring on negative attention. It's better and more admirable than mere courage. You see the God-centered aspect that Jesus was promoting when he chose this as a category head? It's virtuous to bravely take a stand for what's right. Other virtues in this vein are confidence, assertiveness, commitment, resilience, perseverance, strength, tenacity, stability, independence, autonomy, determination, diligence, fortitude, and vigilance. This virtue is an extension of our own personal integrity. If we will habitually do and think what is right, then we will notice when situations around us are off. Otherwise, we'll be bamboozled by Beelzebub along with the rest of the crowd. Standing up for truth, speaking up when necessary, and resisting evil is a noble thing. But what if our efforts to promote the right incur resistance, or even worse, persecution? Well, obviously we should not reply to sin with something sinful. Look at 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 2. We're almost done here tonight. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 19. For this is thankworthy if a man for conscience toward God endure grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it if, when you're buffeted for your faults, that you shall take it patiently? But if when you do well and suffer for it, ye take it patiently, that is acceptable with God. For even hereunto were you called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example, that you should follow in his steps, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled not again. When he suffered, he threatened not, but committed himself to him that judges righteously. When we suffer for doing right, we should commit ourselves into God's hands. He will respond to our needs. One of the ways that God responds is by protecting us. This is expressed eloquently in the famous 91st Psalm that contains a cluster of synonyms that are regarding protection. Look at Psalm 91. Psalm 91, verse 1. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God. In him will I trust. You see, there is such a thing as the secret place. It is something that God can bring to pass, which shields us from the eyes of the adversary. I once had a friend in a Bible fellowship I went out witnessing with, and we were going to a place that he chose, and he was driving in one direction when he suddenly turned around and started driving at high speed in the opposite direction. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said he didn't want the adversary to foil our plans. So that's why he started driving in the opposite direction from where he actually intended to go. I told him that's ridiculous. And then I instructed him that he could pray to God to bless and protect his plans. So we don't need to live our lives in fear of Satan, but in faith of God. Because there is a secret place. It's like a shield from Satan's prying eyes. It's also a refuge from his agents that wish us ill. Look at Psalm 91 verse 3. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor of the arrow that flieth by day, nor of the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor of the destruction that wastes at noonday. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, and 10,000 at thy right hand, but it shall not come nigh thee. Only with thine eyes shalt thou behold, and see the reward of the wicked. Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation. See, verse 9 is how we claim it. What is it to make the Most High our habitation? Well, do you have two lifestyles or one? Do you have one class of behavior when you're at your place of worship, and then you behave differently, a different style of work or home? Well, we need to put all our chips on God's color. A habitation is where we live. Those courageous ones who have stuck their neck out for God and spoken up when things are askew certainly have invited him to where they live. Psalm 91 verse 10. There shall no evil befall you, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwellings. For he shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against a stone. Thou shalt tread upon the lion and the adder, and the young lion and the dragon shalt thou trample under feet. Wow, what a promise. We can't see what's going on in the spiritual realm. We don't know what means or methods God will choose to protect us, but they're awesome. He's got a great arsenal. Sometimes it even involves angels, but it's not for us to tell him how to do what is needed. We just need to believe that it'll come to pass, and then he does it. Verse 14 gives another behavior. That's the on switch for this kind of protection. Psalm 91:14. Because he has set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. Is your love set upon God? Do you know his name, his reputation? Not just the name you can say with your mouth. No, that's everything that God stands for. Do you know the word? Verse 15, he shall call upon me, and I will answer him, God said. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him, God says. With long life will I satisfy him and show him my salvation. Wow. We call upon God in times of trouble and expect his aid. So, if you stick your neck out for God to correct something that's not right, don't be afraid of man's reactions. Put yourself in God's hands and watch him go to work for you. The front line of any battle is where all the power is brought to bear, or you're going to see God's power manifested if you do that. Faith. There's one more beatitude, the 9th one, which contains an additional indispensable and key virtue. So Matthew 5, verse 11 and 12 is where we were. Matthew 5, 11 and 12. Blessed are ye, when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake, Jesus said. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. All the virtues which Jesus listed built with that cadence to this point, to bring them to this objective, faith in him. It was the faith in Christ, which about a year later on Pentecost in 28 AD would get them born again. It was continued faith after that, which would prompt them to do the things which would bring them even more rewards in the hereafter. It was an open door to eternity. These were to be the traits of his church. This was his solution to the legalism which had repressed the believers for generations. This was his counterculture. If the believers espoused these virtues, they would escape the grasp of those who had dominated them and be healed from the inside out. At that time, they were effective to deliver and heal them from the throes of religious abuse. But actually, they'll work for any time, place, or circumstance where God's people need deliverance. This was Christ's beautiful string of pearls to invite them to get what they came to church or synagogue for. So I invite you with the same. Pick your path. Pick your shining pathway. And change. Change. There's no more benefit in indulging in the works of the flesh. Why take 2 steps back before endeavoring to take 3 steps forward? Change. Embrace the light. Choose one of these pathways. Do you really want to understand Jesus? Choose your shining pathway out of your mire. Our sick society needs to change. We all know how to change it. For that change needs to begin somewhere. We all know that change must begin with us. Bless you.